What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Cozy coming at you with another episode here of the Cardboard Cafe. And I got to tell you, I think this one is going to be a very spicy topic to talk about today. And that is the idea that tier lists actually lie to you rather than giving you the full story. So I want to imagine this scenario playing out in your guys' head, right? You copy down an S tier list. You look up the cards that you want to put in the deck because some tier list by some creator online put up that this is the deck to beat everything, and you go to locals thinking you're going to top, thinking you're going to get the praise and you're going to get the love and appreciation that you got for net decking it, and you go X4, you end up last place at locals and you think this list is trash, everything like that. So now you ask yourself this immediate question: was the list wrong? But you fail to ask the other question: was it me that was wrong? So now I want to kind of go over how tier lists rank the deck's ceiling, but not necessarily their floor. So go ahead and sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and let's talk some cardboard. The big question I do want to ask and kind of look at as our first talking point today is, what do tier lists actually measure? So a tier list is built from like top cuts or finals data, and it also looks at the best pilots, the best reps, and best conditions overall, right? So that data reflects a deck's potential in the right hands, but it's not necessarily applying what's accessible or forgiving to mistakes made by people that are not experienced with that deck. So a harder deck might have a higher skill ceiling, but a much lower floor than an easier one that's ranked above it. So like if deck 1 is a tier 1 deck, right? We'll say it's a tier 1 deck. This deck is very easy to play, has a very low ceiling, and a moderately decent high, low floor, decent high ceiling, right? And there's a tier 0 deck that has a crazy high ceiling and just a crazy high floor. You got to be an expert in the game to play it to make it a tier 0. So you think, oh, because it's tier 0, the deck is good, I'm going to play it because it's tier 0, where that's not really taking into account the floor of the deck. So the tier list itself is telling you these decks are really good when done right, when done consistently, when it has the right hands and the right people piloting these decks. They are unstoppable to play, but they're not really looking at what the floor of the deck is and how accessible it is for people to play it, so that way they can truly love and understand how the game works. And that's part of why I feel tier lists are not necessarily objective. They are very subjective based upon the data that is provided, and they can be skewed in a lot of ways, which is why you don't really see me doing tier lists on this channel, or especially over on YouTube, because I feel that tier lists don't really explain the whole story, and this is part of the reason why. A deck that is very, very good may be very hard to pilot versus a deck that's very easy to pilot, but it's very hard to master and make good. So I'm always kind of leaning more towards the side of I'd rather play a deck that's easy to learn, hard to master, because it is something that gives me a challenge and it gives me something to really look forward to when I achieve that accomplishment, right? Versus a deck that's easy to, or hard to learn, but easy to master. So it's hard to learn the deck. So you're going to be very discouraged during the entire learning process of how the deck actually works. But once you understand how it works, it's super easy to do it. But a lot of players don't want to really experience that. A lot of players want a deck that is relatively easy / somewhat challenging to learn. And then you can kind of learn and grow from there, I feel. But for a deck to be super hard to learn, but once you learn it, you're going to get the rewards for it, some people might actually love enjoying doing that, and they might enjoy seeing that journey of 1,000 miles begin with that single step. And it just comes down to the idea of, well, what do you really want to play? But tier lists don't give you that as a frame of reference, so you kind of have to figure it out for yourself, and that's just something I really don't like about tier lists. In addition to that, tier lists hide that variable that nobody wants to look at: execution. So we break down what pilot skill actually covers in like One Piece terms to make it a little bit easier. So something like sequencing, and that doesn't have to relate to just One Piece. Like for One Piece, it would be your dawn usage, your attack order, when to play certain cards out. Like in Magic, it's what to tap and what to kind of sequence your play in for the entire turn. With Yu-Gi-Oh, same thing. What does the full combo line look like, and how do I sequence to get to the end board that I want? Sequencing matters a great deal, and the tier lists just don't provide that. Using One Piece as an example, our tier list are our leaders. So like tier 0 would be like Rocks, Kaido, Shanks, Mihawk. Okay, that doesn't tell me of those 4 which one has the best sequencing, which one does the best when it comes to how you utilize your dawn, things like that. I mean, you would have to eventually learn all of that, but just looking blindly at a tier list to pick something and then you just go with that leader because it was on a tier list doesn't necessarily make you a better player. It doesn't make you a good player either, unless you are secretly a good player and you're just cracked and you want to try something different. Additionally, resource management doesn't look at resource management. You could have a leader that has 5 or 6 life, and you could also look at a leader that has 4 life or 3 life, or if you really want to play Vegapunk because it's not in the meta at all, 1 life. Like it depends solely on like your life versus your hand versus board, and tier lists don't provide that information to you. I feel a lot of creators that make tier lists don't provide that information either. And so it really just comes to having to do more additional research. Like tier lists would be great as a starting point, and say, not just looking at how they do tournament wise. I would like to see more tier lists come out to like what is easier to play, what is better to understand in certain formats. Like having different types of tier lists would be a lot better, but generally tier lists are just looking at what deck is the best based on top cut percentages or tournament results and things like that. Additionally, it doesn't look at reading your opponent's hand and counter potential. So a lot of this easy or hard to learn, easy or hard to master comes from actually playing the deck. And doing your own additional research. Solely relying on tier lists is not going to help you, because the tier list doesn't explain any of that. So like you could say Rocks loses to everything, right? But that doesn't take into account what your opponent has. Your opponent could also brick out, and Rocks just steamrolls it, as an example, right? Looking at from the One Piece perspective. You could also look at bricking potential. Like if there was a way to calculate, okay, what's the brick potential of a deck? It's always going to be a certain percentage. It's never going to be a true 0, because this is a card game and RNG happens and you could brick. There's always a potential to brick, but what deck is least likely to brick and be more consistent across multiple plays and across multiple pilots of varying skill levels? And then, of course, looking at mulligan decisions if you have that in your card game. Like being able to identify when a deck really needs to mulligan, or how hard does a starting hand really matter for a deck type, plays a huge role into something that makes a deck tier 1 or tier 2. And tier lists right now just don't give that option. So I want to kind of go over how to actually use a tier list this time around. And instead of a tier list being a ceiling reference and not just like a buying guide, I want it to actually be a reference to how skillful is the deck, and identifying this deck is easy to play, hard to master. This deck is super hard to play, but easy to understand once you get it, and using that as your frame of reference rather than like this deck is doing really well at a regional tournament, or this deck did really well at a previous event like an Eggman event, and finding the ability to kind of add those variables into a tier list of, hey, this deck did really well at Eggman's tournament, but this person is also a nationals winner, or went to worlds, or has topped multiple regional events. Like this person was really good and that's why they won, and this deck really helped facilitate that. But identifying why and how the deck did really well to kind of add an additional frame of mind to make a skill ceiling and skill floor reference rather than saying, oh, this deck did really well because it topped a tournament. I would love to kind of look at like Yamato as an example for One Piece when I was playing it back in OP16. Like, it was insane to me that they ranked it as like a tier 2 deck, but the deck is actually really, really good once you understand how it works. Because yes, it's very easy to play because it has a very simple combo line, but the difficulty in the deck itself, to make it more complex and add more layers to it, is the decisions that you have to make as a player on what cards to discard, what cards to search for, how you want to combo out with either the Chains event or the Momonosuke combo, and finding a way to pressure your opponent with those big swings, but also protecting your own life by pulling things out with the Trash Recursion Yamato, going for board clears with the Unblockable Yamato. Like, there's a whole lot of things that you would want to do that makes the deck a very high skill ceiling, not necessarily as high as other meta decks at the time of OP16 and even OP16.5, but it still gives you another frame of reference instead of saying, oh, this deck is, one, super cheap, and two, it's moderately good. We'll put it in tier 2. It could potentially be a tier 1 deck if you give it the right pilot that loves the playstyle, the right pilot that understands the fundamentals of the game, and things like that. But I want to give you guys a warning of net decking without piloting. We talked about this in a previous episode of Cardboard Cafe with net decking, and I want to reiterate that here. If you look at a list and you think you're going to do good with it out of the box, you are wrong. I want you guys to research and I want you guys to practice before you take it to locals. And I want you guys to practice these decks so you don't get discouraged and you abandon the deck or you abandon the game. That's something I don't want you guys to do. So looking at tier lists and doing additional research and play testing before spending money is always going to be my first piece of advice, especially not in just this episode, but every episode going forward. So overall, I feel tier lists don't lie about the deck's power. They lie by omission about what it takes to unlock that power. So tier lists both tell you the truth on how well a deck does, but lies to you on how it gets there. So I want you guys to find the best deck for you, and one that you've actually put reps into and not just one that you saw at the top of a tier list. Now, my question of the day is, I want you guys to drop in the comments below, and I want you guys to think about what is an underrated deck that you've mastered, and talk about and think about how those matchups went for you compared to like looking at tier lists of that era to see how well you fit within their meta. And so with that, you guys, that is going to be this episode of the Cardboard Cafe. If you're over on YouTube, make sure you leave a like, you comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell, do all of that stuff because it's very little on your guys' part, but it does a huge, huge amount of deal for us here on the channel. We do have a giveaway going on at the time of this video's airing, where once we hit 500 subscribers on YouTube, we will be doing a giveaway for 3 lucky winners for OP17's alternate art leader proxies as a whole set, and you get some Cozy Games merch. Let me know how you guys are feeling about this new meta for OP17, how you guys feel about card games in general, and I appreciate you guys sitting here with me and talking cardboard, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace and love, Nakama.
Cardboard Cafe, where the Nakama stay. One more hand before we fade away. Coffee's cold, but the talk's still good. See you next time in the neighborhood.